There are words that echo across time, not because they are loud, but because they are true. And some truths are so piercing, so absolute, they don't need to be shouted. They simply exist, and in their stillness, they shake the earth. The Sermon on the Mount is one of those truths. It was never meant to be a decorative passage carved into stone or read as a soft prelude to prayer. It was, and still is, a revolution in plain sight. Yet for many, it has become background noise. It is quoted, referenced, printed on church walls and in bulletins. But few hear it. Not really. The weight of Jesus' words has, in many places, been hollowed out, tamed into inspirational slogans, or simplified into moral advice. What was once fire has been reduced to ash, and what once turned hearts upside down is often treated as a collection of pleasant encouragements for polite society. But what if we listened again? What if we laid aside our assumptions, our theological comfort zones, our cultural lenses? What if, instead of hearing a Sunday school summary, we heard the voice of a man standing on a hillside, calling out a vision of life so upside down it still threatens the systems of power, pride, and self-preservation? What if the Sermon on the Mount was never meant to fit neatly into our religious boxes, but rather to tear them apart? The church has, over time, learned to soften what was once sharp, and maybe not on purpose. Maybe in the attempt to comfort, we have removed the call to confront. In the desire to make Jesus accessible, we have made him familiar. But the Jesus who stood before that crowd on the mountaintop was not concerned with being comfortable or familiar. He was calling his followers to a new kingdom, a kingdom where the last are first, where the mourners are honored, where the persecuted are praised. This is not a kingdom built on ease. It is built on surrender, on transformation, on fire. Too many have read the Sermon on the Mount as if it were a collection of ancient poetry. They admire the rhythm, the form, the beauty. They quote it at weddings, funerals, and holiday gatherings. But admiration is not obedience. Appreciation is not understanding. And there is danger in mistaking emotional resonance for spiritual depth. If these words do not provoke us, disturb us, and ultimately change us, then we have not truly heard them. Jesus did not speak in riddles on that hillside. His words were not abstract or cloaked in mystery. They were raw, direct, and without apology. He spoke of mercy and justice, of purity and pain, of love that defies logic and obedience that demands everything. And he did so without blinking, without compromise, without waiting for permission. This was not a sermon designed to entertain or impress. It was a declaration of war against the way things were, against the way things still are. There is a reason some churches speak little of the Sermon on the Mount. It is too clear, too unmanageable. It refuses to cooperate with our categories. It leaves no room for mediocrity or selective discipleship. When Jesus says to love your enemies, he means it. When he warns about judgment, he is not offering a suggestion. These are not recommendations for the spiritually elite. They are the blueprint for every soul who claims to follow him. Some will say that these words are too idealistic, too hard, that Jesus was describing a perfect world that does not exist. But those who say this reveal how far we have drifted. The Sermon on the Mount is not about idealism. It is about allegiance. It is not about trying harder. It is about surrendering deeper. Jesus was not inviting us to admire his vision. He was commanding us to live it. Psalm 1 verse 2 speaks of the one whose delight is in the law of the Lord, who meditates on it day and night. This is not passive reflection. This is immersion, engagement, surrender. To meditate on the law of God is to allow it to dismantle and rebuild you. The Sermon on the Mount demands no less. It does not sit quietly in the background. It rises up to confront every area of life and forces us to choose between the kingdom of God and the kingdom of self. And so we begin, not with conclusions, but with questions. not with answers, but with hunger. To hear the Sermon on the Mount like never before is to risk everything. It is to risk comfort, reputation, even relationships. But it is also to encounter a truth so radiant, so liberating, that nothing else can compare. Simon Peter was more than a follower. He was a foundation. Among the 12, he stood with a certain weight, not because he was perfect, but because he was willing to be broken and reshaped. The man who once trembled before a servant girl, denying his Lord 3 times in the shadow of the cross, became the very rock upon which the early church found its footing. His transformation was not instant, nor was it painless, but it was real, and it culminated not in triumph before crowds or honor among men, but in a death that mirrored Christ's, yet in a form Peter chose to invert, literally. Peter's final days were spent in Rome, at the heart of an empire that had no patience for dissent and no mercy for those it branded as agitators. Under the rule of Emperor Nero, a man known for cruelty masked in pomp and for a paranoia that led to rivers of innocent blood, Christians became scapegoats for disasters they did not cause. The fire that tore through Rome in the year 64 AD was devastating, and as flames consumed the city, so too did public trust in its leaders. Nero, desperate to preserve his image, turned the fury of the people toward the followers of Jesus. It was in this climate of fear and accusation that Peter was seized. By then, Peter was not an unknown figure. His preaching had reached ears both hungry and hostile. His presence was not merely spiritual, it was a challenge to the power structures of the world. For he carried with him a message that could not be chained, a kingdom that could not be taxed or conquered. The cross he would face was not unexpected. He had spoken of it before, cryptically at first, then with increasing clarity. According to early Christian sources, including the writings of Origen and later church historians such as Eusebius, Peter did not flee the danger. He walked into it steady, knowing full well what awaited him. But it was not death itself that made Peter's final moment extraordinary. It was how he embraced it. When the time came for execution, Peter made a request that has echoed through the centuries, that he not be crucified in the same manner as his Lord. Believing himself unworthy to die in the same position as Jesus, he asked to be crucified upside down. It was not an act of theatrics or rebellion, but of deep reverence. He had walked with Christ, yes, but he had also failed him, and though he had been restored, he never forgot the shame of his denial. In this final gesture, Peter inverted the cross not to mock it, but to magnify it, to declare that even in death, he would not take the place of his master. This act is more than a historical curiosity. It is a theological statement, one that speaks volumes about Peter's heart. In a world where men often seek glory in death, Peter sought humility. Where others might see martyrdom as a crown, Peter saw it as a final chance to bow low. There is power in that image, not just of a man dying, but of a man choosing to die differently, to speak even in silence. The upside-down cross, now often misunderstood and misused in modern times, was for Peter a symbol of profound devotion and a reflection of the reversal Christ brings. The first shall be last. The exalted shall be humbled, the leader shall be the servant. Peter's crucifixion was not swift. Roman executions were designed to be slow, brutal, and public. The upside-down position would have made breathing even more difficult, accelerating the suffering but prolonging the agony. Muscles would cramp and collapse under the weight of gravity, and pain would seize the body in unnatural ways. Yet according to early accounts, Peter bore it not with resistance, but with peace. He had once fled from suffering, even rebuked Jesus for speaking of his own coming death. But now, in his final hours, Peter embraced the suffering as a share in Christ's glory. It is written in 1 Peter 4, verse 13, "Rejoice inasmuch as you participate in the sufferings of Christ, so that you may be overjoyed when his glory is revealed." These words, attributed to Peter himself, take on a haunting resonance when we imagine him on that inverted cross. He had not only written them, he had lived them, and in the end, he had died by them. His theology was not crafted in libraries, but on roads paved with danger, in prisons echoing with chains, and finally, nailed to wood. To speak of Peter's death without acknowledging his earlier life would leave the picture incomplete. He was the one who walked on water, however briefly. He was the one who confessed, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God," when others hesitated. He was also the one who drew his sword in Gethsemane and the one who wept bitterly outside the courtyard. Peter's story is not that of a flawless saint, but of a man who stumbled often and rose always. His final act was not a redemption, it was the fruit of a redemption already granted. His upside-down cross was not a payment for past sins, but a declaration of grace received. Peter's legacy lives on, not only in stained glass and cathedrals, but in the quiet courage of those who follow the narrow way. His life reminds us that leadership in the kingdom of God is not about command, but about compassion. It is not about position, but posture, and his death shows us that the path of discipleship is not marked by ease, but by fidelity. He did not seek death, but when it came, he met it with hands open, not clenched. In that final moment, he was not merely an apostle, but a witness once again, not to crowds or councils, but to the unseen audience of heaven. His voice was silent, but his cross spoke volumes. It still does. There are few metaphors more enduring, more vivid, and more deeply challenging than the ones Jesus chose when he called his followers salt and light. At first glance, the words seem simple, almost encouraging, but beneath the surface lies a piercing mandate, one that cannot be ignored without consequence. Jesus was not offering compliments, he was issuing a commission. He was not merely affirming identity, he was describing impact. To be salt and to be light is not about carrying a label, it is about living in a way that fundamentally disrupts the status quo and refuses to be absorbed by the decay it was sent to confront. Salt, in its ancient context, was not simply a seasoning to enhance flavor. It was a necessity for life, a preservative that prevented meat and food from rotting in the absence of refrigeration. Without salt, decay was inevitable. With salt, preservation became possible. In declaring his followers to be the salt of the earth, Jesus was making a bold and uncomfortable point. The world is in a state of spiritual decomposition, and his people are the agents of resistance. This is not passive presence, this is active preservation. And preservation by its nature implies contact. Salt does not preserve from a distance. It must touch what it protects. It must enter the place of vulnerability and decay in order to delay or reverse its effects. But salt also purifies, and purification is not always painless. When salt enters a wound, it stings, it burns, it exposes the brokenness that was hidden beneath the surface. And yet, that pain is not punishment, it is healing. Jesus was not asking his followers to be palatable. He was asking them to be potent, to carry such truth, such clarity, such holiness, that when they are present, impurity cannot remain comfortable. This is not about moral superiority or religious arrogance. It is about carrying the presence of God in a way that makes compromise uneasy and righteousness unmistakable. And still, Jesus warns of salt losing its taste, becoming useless, good for nothing except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. It is a harsh image, but a necessary one. Salt without flavor is indistinguishable from the dirt it lies upon. A church that loses its sharpness, a faith that blends into the culture, a life that avoids confrontation with darkness, is a life that has lost its power. Influence without distinction is not influence at all. If the people of God are not different, then they are not salt. And if they are not salt, they cannot fulfill the role Jesus gave them. Then comes the call to be light. Light does not argue with darkness. It simply appears, and darkness is forced to retreat. There is no negotiation, no blending. Light does not adapt to its surroundings. It reveals them. It brings clarity to what was hidden and exposes what was disguised. Jesus does not say that his followers should try to become light. He says they are light. It is not a task to accomplish, but a reality to live out. But just as salt can lose its taste, light can be hidden. A lamp under a basket is not extinguished, but it is ineffective. It serves no purpose. And Jesus is clear. His followers are not meant to be hidden. They are meant to be seen, not for their own glory, but so that their lives would illuminate the goodness of God and draw others toward him. Yet, in a world that increasingly values silence over truth, safety over integrity, and inclusion over conviction, the temptation to hide is real. The church today often prefers the warmth of social acceptance over the fire of holy distinction. Many have traded boldness for relevance, and in doing so, have hidden the very light they were meant to shine. This is not simply a personal failure, it is a spiritual crisis. A dim church cannot confront darkness. A quiet church cannot speak for the voiceless. A compromised church cannot preserve what is sacred. And a comfortable church cannot fulfill the radical call of Christ. There is no neutrality in this command. Salt that preserves must first resist. Light that exposes must first shine. The moment the people of God stop doing either, they are no longer fulfilling their purpose. This is not about being offensive for the sake of offense, but about being truthful for the sake of freedom. Jesus did not say, "Be nice." He said, "Be salt." He did not say, "Stay quiet." He said, "Shine." This calling will cost comfort. It will provoke resistance. It will draw lines in places where the world prefers ambiguity. But this is what it means to follow a king who was not crucified for fitting in, but for speaking out. There is no impact without contrast. A church that looks like the world cannot save it. A disciple who fears being noticed will never carry influence that matters. And yet, this is precisely the kind of influence Jesus calls his followers to embrace, an influence that stands in stark contrast to the decay and deception around it. Not a forced difference born from pride, but a holy distinction born from truth. Not superiority, but sincerity. Not control, but courage. A presence that by its very nature calls out what is false and reveals what is real. This is why the metaphors of salt and light still matter. They remind us that faith is not private, passive, or ornamental. It is public, it is purposeful, it is meant to be tasted and seen, and when it is, it confronts the lies of the enemy with the truth of the gospel. It pushes back the darkness not through volume, but through visibility. It reveals the decay not through condemnation, but through clarity. To be salt and light is to refuse the ease of invisibility. It is to step into the spaces where compromise reigns and carry a different standard. It is to live in such a way that others are forced to ask why, and to live with such integrity that the answer always leads them to God. This is not a strategy for success. It is a summons to courage. When Jesus stood before the crowd and declared that he had not come to abolish the law or the prophets, but to fulfill them, it was not a clarification, it was a confrontation. To those listening, the law represented structure, identity, and righteousness. It was the foundation of their spiritual understanding and national life. The idea that someone might rewrite or reinterpret it would have sounded not just bold, but borderline blasphemous. Yet Jesus did not undermine the law. He magnified it. He took what was external and placed it within. He took what had become a system of rules and revealed it as a mirror to the soul. The religious leaders of the time were experts in the law. They knew every command, every tradition, every nuance. Their entire identity was built around adherence to the visible aspects of righteousness. But in their pursuit of precision, they had reduced holiness to behavior. They had made the law something that could be performed rather than something that needed to be embodied. And Jesus, with unwavering clarity, dismantled that illusion. He did not lower the bar. He raised it beyond human reach, not to crush hope, but to redirect it, to place it not in self-effort, but in divine transformation. When Jesus said that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven, he was not asking for more rules or stricter observance. He was revealing that true righteousness is not a matter of checking boxes, but of being changed from the inside out. This is where many stumble, because outward obedience can be measured, controlled, even admired. Inward transformation, on the other hand, is costly. It requires honesty, it demands vulnerability, and it cannot be faked. Jesus does not leave this idea in abstraction. He makes it painfully specific. You have heard it said, "Do not murder." But I tell you, anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. With a single sentence, he exposes how shallow our understanding of sin can be. Murder is not simply an act of violence. It is the final eruption of something that has long been festering within. Anger, bitterness, contempt, these are not minor flaws. They are seeds of death. And Jesus doesn't excuse them, he confronts them. Because he knows that what lies beneath the surface is what ultimately shapes our lives. In the same way, he speaks of adultery, not as the physical act alone, but as the desire that takes root in the heart. Lust is not harmless fantasy. It is a distortion of love. It objectifies, consumes, and slowly erodes the soul. Jesus does not merely ask his followers to avoid scandal. He calls them to purity of thought, intention, and desire. He is not satisfied with appearances. He wants truth in the inward being, just as Psalm 51 verse 6 cries out, "Surely you desire truth in the inner parts. The holiness he demands cannot be fabricated. It must be born from within." This kind of message is not easy to preach, and often it is not preached at all. The modern church, in many expressions, has sanitized these teachings. In a culture that avoids discomfort and craves affirmation, the words of Jesus about anger and lust, reconciliation and purity, are often brushed aside or softened into general moral suggestions. But Jesus was not building a motivational movement. He was establishing a kingdom, and in his kingdom there is no room for partial surrender or selective obedience. The law fulfilled in him is not just about doing the right thing. It is about becoming the right kind of person. Jesus speaks not just of what we should avoid, but of what we must pursue. Reconciliation becomes urgent. If you are offering your gift at the altar and remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift and go. Be reconciled. He places reconciliation even above worship. This is not a call to be polite. It is a call to embody the heart of God. Forgiveness, humility, restoration. These are not extras for the spiritually mature. They are the essence of discipleship. This is where the teachings of Jesus cut deepest, because it is far easier to follow rules than to examine the heart. It is simpler to avoid murder than to deal with resentment. It is easier to remain outwardly faithful than to uproot lust. But Jesus does not lower the standard to meet our comfort. He raises it to reveal our need. And in doing so, he points us to the only source of true righteousness, his Spirit working within us to do what we cannot do on our own. This message is not about shame. It is about reality. Jesus does not expose the heart to condemn it. He exposes it to heal it. The law was never meant to save, but to reveal our need for a Savior. And in fulfilling it, Jesus shows us what it looks like to live with a heart that is fully aligned with the character of God. Not a heart that is perfect by human standards, but one that is surrendered, soft, and continually being shaped by grace. The church must return to this message, Not a message of legalism, but of holiness. Not a message of pressure, but of purity. A gospel that deals only with behavior is a gospel that cannot change the world. But a gospel that transforms the heart, that reaches into the anger, the lust, the pride, and the pain, that gospel has power, because it does not just demand change, it makes change possible. When Jesus speaks of cutting off a hand or gouging out an eye, he is not engaging in metaphor for the sake of dramatic effect. His words, while shocking, are intentional. They are meant to arrest the listener, to jolt the heart out of complacency. In a world that often minimizes sin or repackages it as struggle, mistake, or personal weakness, Jesus strips away the excuses. He presents sin not as a misstep, but as a cancer. And when dealing with cancer, the response cannot be passive. You do not soothe it, negotiate with it, or ignore it. You cut it out before it spreads. That is the kind of urgency Jesus communicates. Not cruelty, not legalism, but spiritual survival. This is where the teachings of Christ diverge sharply from modern sentiment. In many corners of contemporary Christianity, sin has been reduced to a concept rather than a condition. It is discussed in vague terms, often with an underlying assumption that grace will cover whatever damage it causes. And while grace is indeed the foundation of our hope, it was never meant to become a hiding place for unrepentant behavior. Jesus does not treat sin lightly, he treats it as fatal. His language, cut it off, tear it out, reveals the seriousness of its influence. He is not instructing self-mutilation. He is confronting spiritual resignation. He is calling his followers to respond to sin with clarity, not comfort. The hand and the eye are not random choices. They represent action and perception, the things we do and the way we see. Sin often enters through the eyes, takes root in the imagination, and is eventually expressed through behavior. Jesus traces the path backwards. He knows that the physical act is never the beginning. There is always a look, a thought, a lingering gaze, an unchecked desire. And if left unchallenged, that seed will grow. The warning is not about cutting off body parts, but about removing access points, removing what feeds the fire, removing whatever causes the heart to drift, even if that thing appears harmless on the surface. This is where many find resistance within themselves, because Jesus is not simply asking us to avoid scandalous sins. He is asking us to surrender what we secretly love. He is pointing to attachments, habits, relationships, entertainments, and attitudes that may not seem sinful in isolation, but become dangerous when they consistently pull us away from God. He is not concerned with what looks acceptable. He is concerned with what leads the heart. And when something leads us in the wrong direction, his counsel is clear. It must go, no matter the cost. Radical purity requires ruthless honesty. It means confronting the parts of our lives we have managed to protect from accountability. It means asking hard questions. What am I feeding my mind? What do I linger on when no one is watching? Where does my heart go when it is tired, angry, or afraid? What patterns have I normalized because they are common, even though they are corrosive? Jesus does not give space for half-hearted answers. He does not bless the appearance of righteousness. He calls for cleansing that begins at the root. This is a message that the church at times has grown hesitant to proclaim. In an age of spiritual tolerance and emotional affirmation, words like discipline, holiness, and purity can sound out of place. There is fear that speaking too directly about sin will offend, alienate, or discourage. But avoidance does not produce healing. Silence does not lead to freedom. Jesus was never afraid to offend if it meant calling someone into wholeness. His love was not passive, it was fierce. It loved enough to wound, to confront, to awaken. And it is this kind of love that speaks in phrases like, cut it off and tear it out, because it sees what is at stake. To follow Jesus is to live with urgency about the state of the soul. It is to value eternity more than temporary satisfaction. It is to believe that sin, even when quiet and hidden, is lethal. And it is to trust that nothing removed in obedience to Christ will leave us with less than what he intends to give. The call to radical purity is not a call to deprivation, it is a call to freedom. It is the path to a life that is whole, undivided, and filled with peace that cannot be shaken. Psalm 119 verse 9 asks, "How can a young person stay on the path of purity? By living according to your word." This is the posture Jesus affirms, not one of spiritual apathy, but of active pursuit, not one of moral superiority, but of humble dependence. Those who take sin seriously are not harsh or self-righteous. They are people who know the cost of compromise and have chosen a better way. They have counted the price and found Jesus worth every sacrifice. Radical purity is not about rules. It is about vision, a vision of a life that is free from the slow death of sin, a life that is not constantly bound by regret or addiction or secrecy. A life that shines with clarity, that breathes with integrity, that walks closely with God, not out of obligation, but out of deep desire. And this kind of life is not only possible, it is promised to those who are willing to cut off what holds them back and take hold of the one who sets them free. In a culture increasingly shaped by exposure, visibility, and affirmation, it becomes easy to confuse the appearance of spirituality with its essence. Platforms are built not only for performance, but for perception. Everything is curated, everything is shared. Acts once done in private are now documented and displayed, and with every click and comment, the line between devotion and performance grows thinner. Jesus, speaking into this very human tendency, draws attention to something both ancient and revolutionary: the power and beauty of a hidden life with God. He begins with a warning, not to those outside the faith, but to the religious themselves. When you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets. When you pray, do not be like the hypocrites who love to be seen. When you fast, do not look somber as the actors do. These are not critiques of the practices themselves. Giving, praying, and fasting remain essential disciplines, but Jesus goes deeper, addressing the motivation behind them. He is not interested in behavior for its own sake. He is interested in what the behavior reveals about the heart. At the core of his message is a call to authenticity, a plea for purity and purpose. There is a reward for those who do these things in secret, not because secrecy is magical, but because it strips away pretense. When no one is watching, the only reason left to pray is that you long to speak with God. The only reason left to give is that love compels you. The only reason left to fast is that you desire something greater than comfort. Hidden acts become the proving ground for genuine faith, and in them, the soul begins to detach from the constant hunger for human recognition. Jesus does not romanticize secrecy, nor does he demand isolation. What he offers is a way to live that is rooted not in impression, but in communion. The Father who sees in secret is not blind to the unseen. He is attentive, intimate, and fully aware of every whisper, every sacrifice, every longing that no one else knows. It is in that quiet place, free from applause or criticism, that the relationship with God deepens. This is where real faith grows, not in the echo of public praise, but in the stillness where only God is present. Prayer, in this hidden context, is no longer a performance of eloquence, but a conversation of trust. It does not require the right words, only an honest heart. Jesus invites his followers to step away from the noise and into the secret place, to speak to the Father not as a distant deity, but as a present listener. This is not prayer that tries to convince or impress. It is prayer that confesses, listens, pleads, and worships. It is the language of dependence, where the soul is stripped of its disguises and laid bare before God. Fasting, too, becomes redefined. It is not a badge of piety or a tool for spiritual leverage. It is hunger that reveals hunger. When the body is denied, the soul speaks louder. Fasting is not for others to see, but for the one who fasts to see more clearly. It is a sacred interruption of routine that exposes what we rely on and invites us to rely on God instead. Jesus urges his followers to hide their fast, not to deceive, but to protect it from becoming a performance. The power of fasting is in its honesty, not its visibility. Giving, often celebrated publicly in both religious and secular contexts, is likewise redirected inward. Jesus challenges his listeners to give in a way that the left hand does not know what the right hand is doing. It is an image of instinctive generosity, detached from self-awareness and entirely free from the need for acknowledgement. This kind of giving is not transactional. It does not expect applause, return, or recognition. It flows from a heart shaped by compassion, not from a desire for image. And in that place of unobserved generosity, the Father sees, and the giver is drawn closer to his heart. This hidden life, while quiet on the surface, becomes the source of spiritual strength. It creates a reservoir of integrity that sustains the soul when the applause fades and when trials come. It forms a depth of character that cannot be faked or rushed. And it is precisely what the modern world lacks, a faith that is not shaped by optics but by obedience. In an age where image often replaces identity, the call of Jesus is to return to the source, to cultivate a relationship with God that is invisible to others but undeniable in its effects. There is something sacred about what no one else sees. It is there, in the unseen spaces, that God shapes character, heals wounds, and whispers truths that public moments can never contain. The disciplines of prayer, fasting, and giving are not spiritual checkboxes. They are invitations to intimacy. They are not ways to prove something to God or others, but ways to know Him more deeply. The reward Jesus speaks of is not limited to answers or outcomes. It is the reward of nearness, of communion, of being shaped into the image of Christ without needing an audience to validate the process. Psalm 139 verse 1 begins with a profound recognition. You have searched me, Lord, and you know me. This knowledge is not threatening. It is freeing. It means that in every hidden act of faithfulness, in every quiet sacrifice, in every silent prayer, the Father is present, and His presence is reward enough. In the hidden life, there is no competition. There is no need to be seen, celebrated, or compared. There is only the steady, sustaining presence of a God who meets His children in the quiet and transforms them from within. The words of Jesus in this portion of the Sermon on the Mount are not offered as comforting advice or gentle encouragement. They are delivered with authority, not as an optional lifestyle, but as a command. Do not worry. It is not a request for optimism, nor a plea for better coping mechanisms. It is a call to reorient the entire framework of trust, to exchange anxiety for faith, and to root one's sense of security not in what is visible, but in the character of God. In these verses, Jesus exposes the underlying fracture in the human heart, the tendency to rely on self while professing trust in God. Anxiety for many feels like a natural part of existence. It is almost expected, even admired in some cultures, as a sign of responsibility or awareness. But Jesus does not romanticize it or treat it as neutral. He traces its origin to misplaced faith. When he speaks of birds that do not sow or reap, and lilies that do not labor or spin, he is not highlighting their passivity. He is revealing a deeper truth about God's provision. These creatures are not foolish. They are simply free from the burden of self-dependence. They are cared for not because they are significant by human standards, but because their Maker values them. And if they, in their simplicity, are provided for, how much more will He care for those created in His image? Jesus knows that worry is not just an emotion, it is a belief system. It reveals what we truly trust, where we think our help comes from, and how we measure worth and stability. That is why he links worry to questions of value. Are you not much more valuable than they? He's not simply trying to reassure, he is confronting the silent, lingering lie that we are alone in our needs, that we are left to fend for ourselves, that unless we obsess and strive, everything will fall apart. But this lie cannot survive in the presence of a Father who sees, knows, and cares. The heart of this teaching is found in the phrase, "Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness." This is the counterweight to anxiety. It is not about ignoring practical needs, nor is it a call to irresponsibility. It is about prioritizing trust over control. To seek the kingdom is to align one's life with the values, purposes, and rule of God, to look not at what can be gained or lost, but at who he is and what he desires. Righteousness here is not simply moral behavior, it is relational alignment, a life rightly ordered under the care and authority of the Father. And in that posture, worry loses its power. Jesus never promises that life will be free of hardship or uncertainty. What he promises is presence. He does not teach us how to avoid difficult days. He teaches us how to live through them without being consumed by fear. Each day has enough trouble of its own, he says, not to frighten, but to focus. Worry reaches into tomorrow and tries to control what is not yet real. Faith lives in the present, anchored in a God who is already in tomorrow, already working, already providing. The modern world offers countless strategies to manage stress and anxiety. From self-help philosophies to therapeutic practices, there is no shortage of advice. And while many of these tools have value, Jesus offers something far deeper. He offers deliverance, not from the circumstances, but from the grip of fear itself. His answer to anxiety is not technique, but surrender. It is a radical shift in perspective, where peace is no longer dependent on outcomes, but on trust in the one who holds all outcomes in his hands. In many churches, the language of peace is common. Prayers for calm, sermons about serenity, and worship songs filled with references to stillness abound. Yet without the foundation of trust that Jesus describes, these words remain fragile. They float over the surface of fear without ever penetrating its core. What Jesus invites us into is not a temporary escape from worry, but a permanent habitation in the reality of God's care. It is peace, not as a mood, but as a lifestyle. Peace that surpasses understanding, because it is built on something deeper than human logic. It is built on the faithfulness of God. Psalm 55 verse 22 says, "Cast your cares on the Lord, and he will sustain you." It does not say he might. It does not suggest he will do so only for the deserving. It says he will. The act of casting requires intentional release, a deliberate act of letting go. It is the refusal to carry what was never ours to bear, and in that act, we make room for God to do what only he can do. This is what Jesus points to, this total dependence. Not as weakness, but as strength. Not as desperation, but as design. Worry is a thief. It steals energy, clarity, and joy. It distorts the present by coloring it with shadows of an uncertain future. But Jesus, with tender authority, calls his followers to step out of that fog and into the light of divine care. He does not minimize the concerns of life. He simply puts them in their proper place, under the sovereignty of a good and capable Father. To live without worry is not to live in denial. It is to live in defiance of fear's dominance. It is to declare with every choice that God is enough, that he sees, that he knows, and that he is already at work in what we have not yet seen. This is the kind of trust that silences panic, not because the storm has stopped, but because the anchor is sure. Among all the teachings found within the Sermon on the Mount, perhaps none is more radical, more demanding, and more unsettling than the command to love one's enemies. It is not a suggestion wrapped in poetic language, nor a distant ideal meant only for the spiritually elite. It is a direct call, a piercing directive that strikes at the very foundation of human instinct. Where natural inclination leans toward retaliation, protection, and tribal loyalty, Jesus asks something profoundly different. He calls for mercy, for compassion, for a love that refuses to be limited by emotion or circumstance. To love those who love us is simple. It demands nothing extraordinary. It affirms our sense of justice and returns warmth for warmth. But Jesus does not commend what is common. He is not interested in what comes easily. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Even tax collectors do that. In that single question, he levels the field. He exposes the bankruptcy of selective love and introduces a love that is not transactional, but transformational. The kind of love that Jesus describes does not depend on the worthiness of its recipient. It flows not from what others deserve, but from who God is. This love is not rooted in tolerance. It does not merely coexist. It moves toward the one who wounds, toward the one who betrays, toward the one who curses. And it does not do so passively. Jesus says, pray for those who persecute you, not just endure them, not just avoid them. Pray for them. Speak their names in the presence of the Father. Ask for their healing, not their downfall. Seek their restoration, not their ruin. This is not weakness, it is strength that surpasses human understanding. It is a strength that refuses to be shaped by hate, that chooses to overcome evil with good rather than mirror its reflection. To love in this way is to abandon the economy of fairness. It is to release the need to balance the scales. It is to relinquish the illusion that justice must always be seen in the present moment. Jesus is not calling his followers to naivety, nor is he ignoring the reality of pain or injustice. What he is doing is inviting them into a higher way, a divine way, where love is not reactive but redemptive. This love does not excuse evil, but it refuses to let evil define the response. This is the place where many draw back. It is one thing to talk about love as a principle. It is another to embody it when the wound is fresh, when the betrayal is personal, when the offense is deep. And yet, it is in that very place of pain that Jesus offers the most powerful invitation, not because it is easy, but because it is holy. Because it is in loving the enemy that the gospel is most visible, that the kingdom is most tangible, that the heart of God is most clearly revealed. Modern Christianity at times has lost the weight of this command. In its pursuit of relevance, safety, or political power, the church has often mirrored the divisions and hostilities of the culture rather than standing as a countercultural beacon of love. Forgiveness has become optional. Mercy has been replaced by vengeance disguised as justice, and the command to love one's enemies has been buried beneath justifications and loopholes. But Jesus never retracted his words. He never softened them to accommodate cultural trends or human preference. His command stands, and it confronts every disciple with the question, will you follow him here, even when it hurts? This kind of love is not something we can produce by willpower. It does not come naturally, and it is not born from human resolve. It must be formed in us by the Spirit of God. It begins with the recognition that we too were once enemies, alienated from God, hostile in mind, estranged by sin. And yet, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. His love came first. His mercy found us before we asked for it. His forgiveness was extended before we earned it. This is the model, and this is the measure. Psalm 103 verse 10 says, He does not treat us as our sins deserve or repay us according to our iniquities. This is not only a description of divine grace, it is a template for how we are called to live. To love our enemies is to mirror the mercy we have received. It is to become living evidence that grace is not theoretical. It is transformative. It shapes the way we think, speak, and respond. It challenges the notion that love must always be earned and insists that love, when rooted in Christ, must always be given. There is nothing soft or passive about this love. It is a fierce kind of kindness. It is a warrior's heart cloaked in gentleness. It absorbs injury not out of weakness, but out of trust in a justice that belongs to God. It refuses to retaliate not because it condones evil, but because it believes in redemption. And in doing so, it participates in the very mission of Christ, to seek and to save what was lost. This love exposes the limitations of shallow religion. It challenges every attempt to compartmentalize faith into safe categories. It moves beyond doctrines and declarations into the realm of real, costly obedience. And in doing so, it reveals the heart of the Father, who sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous, who loves with an unrelenting grace that knows no borders. To walk in this love is to step into the fire of transformation. It will burn away pride, expose prejudice, and dismantle bitterness. It will test every motivation and stretch every boundary, but it will also free the soul. It will release the grip of hatred. It will heal wounds that vengeance could never touch, and it will bear witness to a kingdom that is not built on fear or power, but on love that never fails. As Jesus nears the conclusion of his sermon, the tone becomes sharper, the warnings more urgent. He has offered the vision of the kingdom, redefined what it means to be blessed, instructed the heart in the way of purity and dependence, and called his followers into a love that transcends human limitation. And now he turns to address the dangers that threaten this way of life, not from the outside, but from within. His warning is not about persecution or political oppression. It is about deception, spiritual deception that wears the garments of truth but bears no substance, no fruit, no life. Beware of false prophets, he says, who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. This is not poetic language or symbolic flourish. It is a sober reminder that not everyone who claims to speak for God actually does. The danger is not always obvious, because false prophets rarely present themselves as threats. They appear sincere. They speak fluently in the language of faith. They often come with charm, confidence, and charisma. Their messages are appealing, their tone reassuring, their words polished and persuasive. But behind the exterior lies a spiritual hollowness. They are not shepherds, they are predators. And Jesus does not mince words in describing their true nature. The way to recognize them, he says, is by their fruit, not their speech, not their following, not even their results. The fruit of a life is revealed over time, through character, through consistency, through the quiet decisions made when no one is watching. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. It is a statement of spiritual reality, not opinion. Fruit does not lie. It testifies to the root. It exposes whether something is rooted in truth or in self-interest. And when there is no fruit, when there is only performance, only show, only noise, Jesus says the tree is destined to be cut down and thrown into the fire. What makes this warning so necessary is the human tendency to be drawn to what is visible, impressive, and loud. In many churches and spiritual communities, there has been a subtle shift over time from depth to display, from substance to spectacle. The gospel is rebranded as a product, preachers become personalities, and faith becomes a means to an end. But Jesus is not impressed with platforms. He is not persuaded by performance. He is not swayed by outward success. He is looking for fruit, real fruit. The kind that cannot be manufactured or manipulated, the kind that comes only from a life deeply rooted in him. This fruit is not limited to good deeds or external behavior. It is the evidence of transformation, humility, love, patience, truthfulness, integrity, and enduring faithfulness. It is the quiet strength that remains when storms come. It is the courage to speak truth when it is costly and the compassion to serve without recognition. It is not glamorous, and it is often not celebrated, but it is what matters, and without it all the noise of religion becomes empty. Jesus continues with words that cut even deeper. Not everyone who says to me, "Lord, Lord," will enter the kingdom of heaven. These are perhaps among the most sobering words he ever spoke. He envisions a scene where many stand before him, not as strangers, but as those who thought they knew him. They prophesied, cast out demons, performed miracles. But he will say to them, "I never knew you." These people were active in ministry, fluent in spiritual language, involved in supernatural experiences, and yet their faith was fruitless. Their connection to Jesus was superficial, transactional, performative. They used his name, but never submitted to his will. They were known publicly, but unknown in the place that matters most. This is the danger of fruitless faith. It creates the illusion of life, but beneath the surface, the roots are withered. It confuses religious activity with relationship. It assumes that giftedness equals godliness. But Jesus separates the two with precision. Character, not charisma, is the true indicator of spiritual health. Obedience, not spectacle, is the measure of faith. And when obedience is absent, no amount of ministry, miracle, or momentum will suffice. The church must reckon with this truth. In a time where influence is easily mistaken for authority, where emotional experience is often substituted for spiritual depth, and where external growth is prized above inner transformation, the call of Jesus is as urgent now as it was then. We must regain our prophetic voice, not the voice that entertains or appeases, but the voice that speaks with clarity, with conviction, and with compassion. A voice that does not shrink back from truth, even when it is unpopular. A voice that exposes falsehood not with anger, but with discernment. A voice that does not tolerate the blending of the holy and the hollow. Psalm 1 verse 3 describes the righteous as a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season and whose leaf does not wither. This is the life Jesus envisions for his followers. Not one of flashy growth or momentary success, but of enduring, life-giving fruitfulness, a life that is nourished by intimacy with God, grounded in his word, and proven over time. The call is not merely to avoid deception, but to cultivate discernment. It is to ask hard questions. What is shaping my understanding of faith? Am I drawn to truth or to personality? Do I seek transformation or entertainment? Am I producing fruit or just noise? These are not questions meant to produce shame, but to awaken urgency. Because at the end of the day, it is not what we say about Jesus that matters most. It is whether he knows us, whether we have surrendered to his will, whether our lives reflect his presence. Fruitless faith is a tragedy not because it lacks effort, but because it lacks roots. It is a house built on sand, impressive until the storm comes. Jesus is not content to leave his listeners with inspiring ideas. He brings them face to face with eternal realities, and in doing so, he calls every heart to examine its foundation. As Jesus brings his sermon to its conclusion, he chooses an image both simple and unforgettable. It is the image of two builders, two houses, and one coming storm. One man builds on rock, the other on sand. On the surface, their homes may appear similar, equally designed, equally furnished, equally impressive, but their difference lies in the hidden places, in the foundations no one sees. And when the rain comes down, the streams rise and the winds blow against both structures, only one stands, the one built on the rock. This final picture is not a metaphor to admire. It is a mirror placed before every listener, then and now. It demands a response because it leaves no middle ground. Jesus has spoken plainly, urgently, with relentless clarity. He has painted the contours of the kingdom of heaven, exposed the poverty of superficial faith, and called his followers to a life of radical surrender. Now he brings it home with one ultimate question: what will you do with these words? It is not enough to hear. Both builders in his story heard the same message, but only one acted on it. Only one took the words seriously enough to build differently. This is where the distinction is made, not in exposure to truth, but in obedience to it. Jesus does not seek admiration. He is not calling for fans or casual listeners. He is calling for followers who will take his words and reshape their lives around them, no matter how inconvenient, no matter how countercultural, no matter how costly. The storm in this parable is not hypothetical. It is not a matter of if, but when. Life will bring rain, it will test what we've built, it will shake everything that is unsteady. And when that moment comes, only what has been anchored in him will remain. Church attendance, inspirational quotes, good intentions, none of these can withstand the weight of suffering, loss, or judgment. Only obedience, rooted in trust, born from genuine relationship with Jesus, can provide the kind of foundation that will not crumble. What makes this warning so piercing is how deceptive sand can be. It feels solid at first. It allows for quick building. It accommodates the shape we want, the timeline we prefer, but it lacks permanence. It shifts. It gives way when pressure comes. Many live their lives on this sand, not out of rebellion, but out of convenience. They prefer a version of faith that adapts to their lifestyle rather than one that transforms it. But Jesus makes it clear, only obedience is rock. Only surrender builds something that will last. Psalm 18 verse 2 says, "The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer." This is more than poetic language. It is the declaration of one who knows what it means to trust in something immovable, someone unshakable. Jesus is not calling us to follow rules. He is inviting us to build our lives upon his very presence, his wisdom, his truth. And he promises that when we do, we will stand, not because we are strong, but because he is. The Sermon on the Mount is not a gentle encouragement. It is a seismic invitation. It reveals a kingdom that inverts the values of the world and offers a life that cannot be destroyed by chaos, rejection, or even death. But it must be chosen. It must be built stone by stone, decision by decision, in the quiet obedience of daily life. And in doing so, it becomes more than a sermon. It becomes the foundation of an unshakable life. If this message stirred something in your heart, if it opened your eyes to the radical call of Jesus in a way you have never seen before, then do not let it end here. Take a moment now to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future teachings like this. Click the like button to support the message and let us know your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear how this truth is speaking to you. Most importantly, share this video with someone close to you. A family member, a friend, a neighbor. Someone who needs to be reminded of what it means to build their life on the rock. Let the Sermon on the Mount no longer be distant words on a page, but a living voice in your soul. One that shakes you, shapes you, and strengthens you to stand in every storm.